Prophet. Your friend is Jay.
Hello, Harold, are you ready? Harold, are you ready?
I can hear you. I'm ready.
Yeah, so we're in your hands.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, I can. Yeah, good afternoon. I can see Mr. Masiko and Dr. Clara. So good afternoon, everyone, once again.
Good afternoon.
Yes, Joyce, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, are we live? Do we proceed?
I believe so. It's too, so we should be.
We are live.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome everyone that has tuned in today for this webinar. And today we are discussing the reflections in Uganda's educational leadership and management. We have very interesting panelists today, and I am doing this together with my co-moderator, Joyce Katende. We shall do this together to the end, and she'll be introducing herself in a bit. But you are welcome, and you can encourage others to tune in. You can send the link via Facebook, via Zoom. For those who are joining us via Zoom, can send a link to a friend and invite them to tune in as we forge way to Uganda's educational leadership and management. Joyce, please welcome the panelists and the listeners.
Thank you, Harold. You're all very welcome to another episode of a very interesting topic. Just to make it clear, once again, this webinar is brought to you by the remarkable Crownell Cow Limited, in conjunction with our co-sponsors, Sinbel Advocates and Kampala Young Christian Cooperative. Kindly check out their website, check out their various social media platforms. I believe you find the information quite interesting. For Sinbel Advocates, you can check out their Facebook, their Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. And for KYC Group, you can check out their Facebook and Twitter pages. So, like Harold mentioned, I'm your co-host, and much as my background is law, I'm really here as a concerned citizen, anxious to hear from our experts and to know, looking at our education system, what is happening, where are we going, are we on the right track? So when it comes to the objectives of today, we are trying to look at, to assess the overall government COVID-19 response towards the education sector. when you look at the government and what it's doing right now, and looking at our education sector, do you feel that it's done enough? Are we on the right track? Or are we missing something? We're also going to be reflecting on the role of schools and sectorial leadership and educational management in advancement of our education system. Even, in other words, if you're looking at our education system, even without the whole COVID situation, do we have the right system in place for the kind of lifestyle and for the kind of life that we are preparing for our children? Is it the system that will really take them to where they need to go? And lastly, we are going to be deliberating and looking at, what strategies can be are in place to influence the thriving of the education sector, especially now in the post-COVID era, for the benefit of all stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I'm looking at government, I'm looking at, the educationalists, but most importantly, I'm also looking at the parents like myself. So that is really what we're going to be looking at and discussing here today. With us is a very distinguished panel of experts, and I'm sure you've been looking at the flyer, and I'm sure many of you are super excited to hear what are they going to say. So the first panelist, I'm going to request our IT person to put up his flyer. The first panelist is going to be Mr. Philbert Baguma, who is the Secretary General of Uganda National Teachers Union. So we're going to hear from what does the Teachers Union say, what are they thinking about, and how are they going to address these issues. Next, we'll be interviewing Dr. Ekwaro Obuku, who is a health policy expert. So we're going to hear also on his side, in light of everything that is being announced, when schools are closed, how are they thinking of reopening? As a health expert, he's going to share with us his views. And then we're going to hear from the renowned Matsiko Godwin Muhwezi. I think any of us who is into social media or any kind of forum of interaction has heard him, has met him, knows something about him. He's the managing partner of Simbel Advocates. So he's here to give us the legal view, but also he's a voice for many of us who can't really articulate what we want to say. And finally, we have Dr. Clara Wekesa, who is an expert physician and parent. So she's going to give us a combined view of what an expert thinks about our whole education system and also as a parent. So with that, that's a brief introduction about our various speakers, and I'm handing over to Harold to take us through the next step. Thank you, Harold.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joyce. And I think our viewers and those who are listening have a sneak peek of what we should be expecting in today's discussion. And I am personally expectant, and I am sure by the time we close, it shall be evident that something has been changed and seeds of a better education system and management in Uganda have been planted. So let's just right away dig into this discussion. Phil, but can you hear me? Mr. Philbert Baguma. Yeah, good afternoon.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. How are you? How are you?
Very fine. So those who do not know Mr. Very fine, very fine. We can hear you. Yeah, so those who do not know Mr. Philbert Baguma, he's the current Secretary General of the Uganda National Teachers Union. And it's a formally registered and labor union for all the teachers in the country. And he has also had vast experience in working in the public sector in that capacity. And he's a seasonal educator. He's been educated in education development work at the national union level. And Philbert is also a teacher by training and profession. And it's in that capacity that we want to engage him on those different levels. For a teacher who has been teaching since 1994. And he was a headmaster in that capacity until 2010 when he joined this educational management issue. So it's very pertinent that when we are discussing this topic, we involve such stakeholders that have had the experience and the touch of education. So Philbert, that's why I want to bring you in on that point to discuss the issue regarding educational management, and specifically UNATU boasts of advocating for teachers' rights, for higher pay, and as a platform to improve the welfare of teachers. And even you have an example of Walim Sacco that forwards loans to teachers to make sure their welfare is better and etc. unfortunately, the past couple of months have had us to go back to the drawing board to reevaluate ourselves. So as UNATO, as the labor union for teachers, do you think enough advocacy has been done in this area? And what more can be done to ensure that teachers go to classes happy, satisfied, with a better welfare, with better pay in this quite rough patch of months that we have had due to COVID-19?
Thank you, Harold. And good afternoon to everyone. First of all, COVID caught us off guard. As the Ministry of Education and Sports, as Ugandans, parents, teachers, and the learners, none of those categories could really think that education was going to come to a halt suddenly. You recall it was on 18th March when it was on 18th March when Uganda got the accident, and the president was ordered that on a midday, all education institutions should close. And indeed, they closed. And what did that mean? It meant
Mr. Philbert, we seem to have lost you due to network issues. Could you just repeat what you said before this break? We lost you on the point of the presidential address. Hello, Mr. Philbert? Mr. Baguma, can you hear me? We seem to have lost Mr. Baguma. And if he will reconnect, we shall have him back. But he has been discussing very interesting topic, and the background was how COVID caught the country unawares, starting with the 18th March, where the president says, let's have more than 7 million Ugandans who go to school go back home due to this situation. We shall continue with the discussion when he is back to tackle the questions that have been raised to him. But as we wait for the clarification and as our technical team gets in touch with him to sort that, we can have the next speaker, and Joyce, maybe you can take us through that. When we get Mr. Baguma back, we shall proceed to his part of discussion. It's okay, we shall resolve it. Joyce?
Thank you, Harold. It's interesting that many times when you set up all these technical things, everything is ready, but somehow the technical aspect of it keeps, coming in the way. But all is well. We still have our other panelists on. Before I proceed, I see Mr. Baguma here. I don't know if you'd like to continue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Baguma, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Perfect. So you are telling us something, and we are interested to hear it to the end.
Yes. I was indicating that
Maybe you can turn off your video and leave only the audio.
Gave
Network will be
education
better.
institution clearance were ready. So nobody expected that, and the children went home. The parents received them. This was almost halfway the term. because the schools had been on for the days out of 89. And even when we closed the institutions, nobody could tell when they would reopen. So this tortured the students, the learners, science, because their parents expected the Ministry of Education to help, because like now you can see how the network is disturbing us. It does when it comes, by this time we would have lost, is not actually taking. What do we intend to do? First of all, the tricky situation is we only rely on Ministry of Health to advise government on when the schools should be reopened. And as such, it makes the planning very, very difficult. In a sense that the schools were closed for some time without even school managers going to the schools because it was total lockdown. When they eased the lockdown, they are contradicting circulars from Ministry of Finance, where
I'm afraid we have to lose.
Ministry of Finance is saying all the Hello?
Mr. Baguma, let's have our technical person call you shortly to sort your network issues. After that, that's when we'll dig deep into the discussion and the questions we had for you. But for now, let's have Baguma's mic muted as we sort the issue. And Joyce Katende, you can take us through the next panelist as we sort the network issues with Mr. Baguma. Kindly.
Thank you, Harold. We'll be returning shortly with Mr. Baguma. And now we're going to go to a very interesting panelist who I have actually been waiting to ask some of the questions that I hear. This is Dr. Ekwaru Obuko, who is a health policy expert. He is a Ugandan physician, a researcher, academic and health policy expert, who is the immediate past president of the Uganda Medical Association, a professional industry association that champions medical doctors' interests in the country. He is also currently a Doctor of Philosophy, a philosophy candidate at Makerere University College of Health Science in collaboration with Macquarie University. Dr. Ekwaru Obuko also teaches a course in systemic reviews as part of his Master in Science in Clinical Trials on a long-distance program at the London School of Tropical Medicine. He also teaches a course in evidence synthesis in the Masters in Science in Clinical Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the Makerere University, Uganda. Dr. Obuku, you're very welcome to this platform. Could you say hello to our listeners?
Hello, how are you? Thank you very much for having me here. I'm so sorry. I'm in Nakawa Market here. I found myself in a shop shopping for mattresses, and I had forgotten totally about this meeting. Good thing with technology I'm using in my phone. So I'm not going to use my video very well at this time because I'm in the shop seated.
No, that is very understandable. We are simply happy to have you here. So, Doctor, in the wake of all this COVID thing, I think your profession must be the most coveted right now because everyone wants to know what is exactly happening. The information we're getting, is it actually genuine or, it's being made up? So as a doctor, please be prepared for some of the questions that we're about to ask. But I'll start off with a soft landing. The Ministry of Education and Sports gave interim solutions in the wake of the outbreak, including studying on radio, television, newspaper printouts, etc. How effective and practical were these measures, and what could be done to improve the situation for the betterment of our 15 million learners? Do you think these measures are effective?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Joyce Katende. I'm very, very pleased to be part of this discussion. Just because education is the key, you know, we've got to still believe that education is the key. And two, just last week, we were having the same discussion on the issue of reopening medical school, which I shall share. But more importantly is to underscore the fact that, oh, by the way, before I go far, let me thank my colleague there, the Secretary General of the UNATU. I'm very happy to see you here, sir. We are always in the struggle for betterment of the professionals. So yeah, back to my point that, you know, COVID is real, by the way. Sometimes I've been told, I've been called out for underestimating or underlooking COVID. COVID is real. COVID is there. It is in Uganda. It is in East Africa. It is in Africa. But COVID is mostly in Europe. It is mostly in America. And obviously where it started in China and Asia. So what COVID is to America and Europe is what malaria is to Uganda. So that is just it. There are mosquitoes in Florida, for example. I don't know whether they still carry malaria, but the whole of USA does not use the mosquito nets. Okay? There are mosquitoes in Australia causing dengue fever, but the whole of Australia, they don't use mosquito nets. So similarly here, there is COVID, and the baseline risk is very low. And at that time, we were making this argument, we were saying, no, maybe the money we are putting in masks, $20 million, it can go elsewhere. So just to underscore the fact that COVID is there, and we have received 2 reports so far, it has killed 2 Ugandans. The other important point, obviously, is relation to education. I will give you the perspective of medical school. Medical school, you learn by doing. A doctor learns by attending to patients. There is nothing like simulation of, say, a cesarean section operation. It is real. When you are doing internship, you must attend to a mother who is pregnant with an obstetric emergency. Then you do the cesarean section. That's how you learn under supervision. Similarly, the clinical year starting from undergraduate. Now, when it comes to postgraduate or master's degree in medicine, you are actually working. It is not the classwork that matters. It is what you do in hospitals. Having said that, there is no need to shut the university when it comes to examining the clinical students in postgraduate learning. Because anyway, they are already qualified doctors who have come to do a master's. And if they are not working in these hospitals as students, they will go back where they are employed and still work. So they should progress. They should progress with this during this period. Now, the question of Ministry of Education in Uganda and schooling. I have a candidate in P7. I am very concerned. I have one in S1 who finished P7 last year, has gone ahead. That one I was relieved. But the one in P7, I'm concerned because it appears the year is ending. That is one. 2, obviously no one wants a dead child. That is a very important thing. And therefore, I am really supportive of the Ministry of Education to find alternative ways of learning. My Master of Science in Clinical Trials that I learned at the University of London, UK, I finished it before I stepped there. I stepped there in 2012 after I had finished my master's to go and teach a certain course. But I'd never stepped there as a student. And I found myself equally effective. And I was hired at that time by the University of London to become what we call a tutor. We couldn't become lecturers because we're not giving live lectures, but we became tutors. We were as good as lecturers anyway for distance learning. So I wanted to underscore that distance learning can be effective if well done. In any case, when I visited the University of London also to do a course, which was face-to-face, I found the distance learning approach better because I concentrated more. The teachers would send questions which don't leave the blackboard. They leave answers which don't leave the blackboard, and the teacher is not rushing away because of traffic jam. The teacher attends to you better in distance learning. That's what we found in distance learning, if we use those platforms which permit that. And therefore, I strongly support the Ministry of Education's move to reach out to learners wherever they are. What are the disadvantages that come up? Yes.
Dr. Buku, you're making a valid point, but going back to the question I asked, this government has provided these alternatives, radio, TV, newspapers, etc. And you've also talked about e-learning. But my question is, how practical is that in Uganda? How many learners actually have access to all these devices? Take, for example, this webinar, organized clearly, but we are having even a challenge just interviewing one of the panelists. So is this really realistic? And just like you, I also have a candidate. What are you, can you really say that it's best to keep the students out?
Thank you very much. Let me tell you that is exactly where I was coming from. That is where I was coming to, sorry. I was coming to what are the disadvantages. I learned through this medical political career of mine that you must praise government first. Otherwise, people are sending, different messages that Obuku is very negative. No. So I was doing that part of first appreciating what government has done before I give alternatives. That's what I was doing. And I found that preamble is very, very important to put yourself in good books. Otherwise, people might think, the government might think you're just anti-government, which is not the case. All of us want the best. I mean, my child does not belong to any political party. I don't belong to any political party. But we use the same road, the same health facilities, the same schools. This morning, I have just finished assessment of my 3 youngest children in Aga Khan. They were doing distance learning using the Microsoft Teams. I can tell you Aga Khan is ahead. But even then we had challenges. I had to be there. Basically, my wife goes to work, okay? And one person doesn't have to work in order to supervise the children. So that is one of the challenges, that the parent now becomes the teacher. And therefore, the parent in essence gives up employment, which could be okay when there is no employment. Many of us have lost jobs. So that's one challenge. But then when the Aga Khan people were doing this, I asked them that what about the parent who cannot afford computers? Because for us, we were lucky. We had bought video games, and the video games could were compatible. But if it was a question of buying new computers, we would not have been able to. So again, the investment in the infrastructure by parents is going to be heavy. Number 3 is the equity in all this, and falling within the Ministry of Health of Education guidelines. Aga Khan has had to stop this program at the end of this month, July. And I supported the Ministry of Education because Uganda must move as one. The Sustainable Development Goals were crafted around the failures of the Millennium Development Goals. And the theme is, leave no one behind. And what strategies has Ministry of Education done which can work? One is to, first of all, create policy environment. 2 is to provide for the tools. Although the Ministry of Education has provided the tools, I can tell you that asking a parent to supervise a child on radio is very difficult, because the parent has to go and dig. Now, will the child be able to catch up? Yes. Will there be difficulties? Yes. Why? I have been using a computer for 15 years now. I can tell you between 2012 and 2014, when I changed to Apple, I was hardly using that computer. I had to use 2 computers. But over time, I managed to adjust. People can learn and people can program to use this system of education. And I really support it. Is it sustainable? No. It is not sustainable. It is a short-term measure. Why? There is an advantage in human interaction, face-to-face. Children must learn not to interact with radios, but to interact with fellow children. And that is part of learning and growth and development and building society. So in terms of the psychosocial support mechanisms, then you are going to find this distance learning a disadvantage. Is it sustainable? No. People have started boarding schools, Gayaza, private schools, etc. If these places do not function, it is going to affect the economy negatively. Because what are teachers going to do now? Okay? There is need for these teachers to continue teaching and being paid as such. Okay? Otherwise, their salaries are going to come if they do not teach. And in this distance learning, the fees probably has to be adjusted. So for me, yes, these methods are practical. There is going to be inequity, but I have understood government is going to buy radios. Government is thinking through some of these things. What are the challenges? The biggest challenges are going to remain the same. I visited some primary schools in my constituency when I was planning to run for office there, and I was very surprised by the quality of the construction. Whether a student can or a pupil can concentrate in her education or his education there. And for me, I think that we need to put in place mechanisms to continue improving in terms of governance and efficiency. Corruption remains a problem. Even through this, corruption will take the greater share of the benefits more than the pupil. Let me stop there for now. Finally, finally, in terms of health, this has been my passionate argument, especially before these 2 deaths. The ministry's reports from government and State House was that the burden of COVID was very low, very, very low. You test 230,000 and you find only 3,000. So less than 1.5% in what we call the most at-risk groups, travelers, drivers, etc. We know those are most at-risk groups. That means in the population, which is those who are outside the risk groups, is very, very low. That means activities can go on with SOPs. And therefore, I was excited to see schools starting, okay, with, say, fewer pupils, meaning the lower classes, maybe P4, P3, P2, P1, can wait. And these other classes can spread out. After all, many of our classes don't have windows. I'm not talking about Kampala. I'm talking about the Uganda proper, okay? That's number one. Then 2, we would have instituted things like washing hands. The issue of masks is very expensive, but we could have tried to use cloth masks, asking parents to provide in the homes. Whatever cloth they have, go to the tailor, the same way you make a uniform. Then the distancing, of course, we've talked about. Washing hands, things like temperature gun and so on and so forth can also be implemented by the nearest health facility. So it is not impossible to have schools going if we are structured and systematic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Obuku. I can clearly, from what you've just presented to us, it's very clear that you are a great debater also in school. You have clearly presented the pros and the cons and have left us at that point where we're wondering, okay, where exactly is he standing? Which leads me to the next question, and I'm sure you'll be thinking about that. In your earlier submission, you mentioned something that was interesting. You said that COVID-19 in Uganda or in Africa, particularly Uganda, is kind of like malaria in the US. Now, having malaria in the US doesn't mean everyone in the US has a mosquito net. So you gave the two as the correlation. And even looking at your CV, you're someone who's really into medicine and looking at evidence-based, making a decision based on evidence. Now, I would like to bring to your attention, and I'm sure you know, there are countries like Italy that have recorded the highest COVID-19 infections and perhaps even death rates. And yet, despite having such a high record of deaths and of infections, schools have reopened and interestingly have reported the absence of the spike in cases, let alone the low infection rate in the children. Now, as a health expert, and in regard to the closing of schools, do you really think this is justified? Yes, I know you mentioned that COVID is real, but you've told us, even from your expert knowledge, that you know what, the way COVID is really is the equivalent of malaria in the US. And yet we have seen countries that have really had high death rates reopen the schools and we haven't seen a spike. So is the closing really justified?
Yeah, thank you so much again. Just, of course, the closing is justified, especially at that time, we didn't know anything. We didn't know where it was. We didn't know what COVID was. Nobody knew anything. You can see that there's been a shift. a shift in the evidence base. Previously they were telling us, oh, it cannot be transmitted through air. Actually, the story started with it cannot infect humans. Okay, human to human transmission was not possible. It was only from animal to humans. At that time, they thought it is the pangolin in China there in the markets for wild animals, wild animal meat. Then within a few weeks, they said, oh, you know what? It can be transmitted from human to human. So we are learning. Then they said, no, it is through contact. Contact meaning you must be in close proximity within 1 meter for 15 minutes. At least within 1 meter for 15 minutes. That's why they say social distancing is a meter and above. Okay? But all those were theories. Now it has been reported that it is possibly airborne. So these things are changing. So with that kind of evidence, if it's airborne, then you know a mask is necessary. If it is contact, then it is washing hands and keeping a distance, and so on and so forth. But having said that, you have underscored that very well. Why has Italy brought back children? The people just want to go about their own business. They are beginning to understand that, you know what, we have got to live with COVID, which should be the case here. If you ask someone today whether they fear COVID or not, compared to the beginning when we knew nothing, today people fear COVID less. And let's not remove our eyes from the ball that other non-COVID conditions are continuing to kill people. The other time I challenged my colleagues in the scientific committee and said, why don't you present to the president the name, age, and address, and gender or sex of the person who have died of malaria that week before he speaks? Because every time he comes to speak, he says, oh, so-and-so died, is from Masaka. No, so-and-so got COVID, is from Masaka. He gave the children, he's so careless. Remember that, Boda man? So he has all those details. We're saying, why don't you get the details of the mothers who have died that week? So what COVID has done is to take away our attention from the non-COVID diseases. School-going children, okay, die from malaria, die from pneumonia. Why are we not paying attention to that? Should we close schools because 10 children died from malaria? Then we will never go to school. So using that analogy, then you can say, let us open schools, okay, and start learning. Then someone will ask you a question and say, who does not mind their child dying first? Then everybody in the room will keep quiet because of the sort of the psychology and the psychosocial nature surrounding COVID-19. Panic, anxiety, stress, anger, you know, because we have no
But
immediate
can't you say,
solution.
doctor, that all that has just been propagated by the media and hyped beyond? Because using the example you're giving, I would assume, and I'm not a medical expert, but you have over 1,000 people dying probably on a daily basis in Uganda when it comes to malaria. And yet in COVID, in a space of about 4 or 5 months, we've had 2.
Well, we presented that argument to the president using the government report. 4,501 people died of malaria last year, which translated, I think, to something like 7.8, I don't remember the figure, per day. And we said that from the time, actually we calculated for malaria, pneumonia, and severe anemia. Why did we calculate for those 3? We said those 3 require the same systems which COVID requires. So when we are investing for COVID, we are also investing for those 3. And that time it was day 34 of the lockdown when the president was going to address, make another address, I think the 13th address on day 35. And I can tell you that at that time there were 890. We estimated that 890 people have died since the lockdown using the baseline figures of the previous year, meaning people are continuing to die. And they could have even died more because of the COVID lockdown effects. Studies have shown this. In fact, when the ministry looked at this critically, they discovered immunization had gone down by 13%. OPD attendance, outpatient attendance had also gone down. So where are these people going to be attended to? What is happening to them? It is possible that these people are dying in the community. We even argued that at that time, that probably these cases of pneumonia, there could be COVID hidden there. And if you look at the first reported case of COVID-19 death, it was actually a pneumonia. They had diagnosed pneumonia and they had been dying. 2,800 people died from pneumonia in the previous year. Okay, that means that have they stopped dying? No, we just need to look at those cases. So yes and no, you know, it depends on the lens you want to take. We can take the pragmatic lens. We can take the lens of being cautious, which is what they're saying. We want to be cautious. You know, we went to the bush. Even when we were in the bush, we cut off part of Uganda, and people waited for exams later, which is okay. It just depends on the view we want to take. The thing is that if the economy is doing badly, people will die of hunger, people will die of poverty. Poverty kills. And therefore, it is incumbent of us to again reactivate and move the wheels of the economy. And part of the economy is the education sector. The education sector employs so many people. It means that exercise books are being used, food is being supplied, water is being supplied, and other additional services are being supplied. Labor is being supplied by teachers. Coaching is going on for additional income. So really, education is one of those sectors which drives the economy, and shutting it down for a very long time, I don't think is the way to go. Whether we should open now or not is the call of the president and his wife, who is the Minister of Education. But from an expert point of view, we can open schools safely.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Obuku. It's good that you've concluded on that. There will be more questions coming in, but right now I'm going to give you a short break so you can take some water. And while I hand over to Harold to ask a few questions to our next panelist, please don't go away. Please continue watching and following us on Facebook and on that's on the Crown Core Facebook page. And please check out the pages of our sponsors. That's Crown Core, Sinbel Advocates on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and Kampala Young Christian Cooperative, that's on Facebook and Twitter. So over to you, Harold. Thank you so much, Dr. Obuku.
Hello. Yes, Joyce, thank you very much. I was saying that I pity those who debate with Dr. Obuku on the other side. They must be facing it very rough. But he has been very insightful in some of the things that have been appearing on TV and other media houses concerning the disease and the policy that the government has been taking, and on education and even other sectors. I see Mr. Philbert is back. Mr. Philbert, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Welcome back to civilization.
Thank you. I had to change direction.
Oh, now at least we can hear you clearly. And let me just re-engage you on the issue that I wanted you to enlighten us on. We want to talk about teachers' welfare, and specifically on whether UNATU and even other sector players are doing enough to ensure that the teachers go to classes happy, with no holes in their trousers, with one-sided shoes, without one-sided shoes, with welfare back at home very well, because they are the bed of this thing we want to improve. So tell us about that and how it can be improved.
First of all, the salary of the teacher has remained very low. And over time, we have tried to engage the responsible offices. Right now, we have a collective bargaining agreement that is pending and which was not implemented because of the current situation. We have this COVID-19 which came, and this collective bargaining agreement was supposed to be implemented, and therefore, because of the prevailing circumstances, we could not follow it up as it should have been. But also is the issue of continuing to pay the teachers even when they are at home. Because governments do not pay soldiers to go for war. But even when there is no war, they are supposed to be paid.
You continue to pay for the soldiers, yes.
And therefore, closing the schools does not call for stopping the salary of the teacher. The challenge we still have is for the teachers in the private sector. Because for them, the salary they get is from the parents' payments. Now the parents are not paying. because the school is closed. The owners of schools do not have income. If you have been monitoring on social media, there is a very long list of over 100 schools which are up for sale. And therefore, someone who is selling the school, it's really difficult to tell him that, look, you have not paid the teachers since February this year. And that has remained a very big challenge on our part because
I've even had rumors of some people converting schools into rentals. Hello, Mr. Baguma. We seem to have lost you again. Can you hear me? Hello, Mr. Baguma. We seem to have lost Mr. Baguma once again. We apologize for the inconvenience in the network. And I think as we wait for him to come, we shall dig deep into the next expert or the panelist. And I don't know whether Mr. Godwin is online. Mr. Godwin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I beg your pardon? Kindly confirm if you can hear me, Mr. Matiko. Yeah, thank you very much. Our next panelist, yeah, finally we have the video of Matiko Godwin Muhwezi. He's a managing partner of Greenbell Advocates, and a little bit of the background is that Godwin started his legal career as the African Renaissance Fellow seconded to the United Nations, the Dispute Tribunal, and he also worked as a legal associate at Verma, Gibran and Company Advocates before moving as the in-house as general counsel. And Godwin also worked as a legal officer for the securities of Bank of Africa and for Bridge International Academies as a manager of legal services, and later for Phoenix International as global associate legal counsel. And he has also previously tutored law students at Uganda Christian University. So as you can see, he's a man of vast experience and expertise. And his areas of focus for our listeners and first timers are on social impact investments, public law, tax infrastructure, public-private partnerships, and mergers and acquisitions, energy, banking, finance, aviation law, name it. So we are talking to an expert. And Godwin, if you can hear me, I'm sure the smile is saying thank you, but I shall take that. But if you can hear me, let's talk about this topic in line of budget allocation and government programs, because we have had the NRM government set up programs like QPE, USE. We have had the government sponsor students at universities and bring up those little programs in order to improve the education system and the outlook of the whole sector. So in terms of the budget allocation and those government programs that you have talked about, do you think, in your own opinion, that the government has done enough to shape our education towards what it ought to be? And if that is a yes or a no, what lessons are there for us to pick from the devastating effects of the coronavirus pandemic?
Thank you, Harold. Yeah, and so that's just introduction. Yeah, this discussion is very interesting, and good to hear what Dr. Buko and the other experts have been saying so far. To piggyback on what Dr. Buko said, just to answer your question, I think he raised a very funny conclusion when he said that whether schools open or not is dependent on the president and his wife. He's the Minister of Education, but from the scientific point of view, schools can safely open. I think that's something that Uganda needs to think about, where a sector like that, where children
Mr. Godwin, I will request that you
parents-
increase your mic. Your volume is a little bit low. Thank you.
Is this better? Is this better?
Yeah, that's better. I can hear you now.
All right, thank you. So I was saying that from what Dr. Buku said, it's interesting that we have the scientists saying that it's safe to open schools now, but the decision is based on a family decision by the president and his wife. And that means that there's a disconnect between what the Ministry of Health is doing and the Ministry of Education in terms of the guidelines that are coming out. In terms of the budgeting, which is what you asked, obviously you see that from the previous budget allocations, there's been a decline from in 2012 to 2013 financial year. We had over 14.6% of the budget to education. It has now gone as low as 11%, but still at 80 billion for what we are having is a
About
very big challenge.
this topic in line of budget allocation and government programs, because we have had the NRC.
Yeah. So you find that a lot of this money that is allocated is given to UPE and USC, and it's even not the only allocation. We have a lot of grants, we have a lot of money coming in to support some of these programs. But the evidence that is coming out is that learning outcomes from USE and UPE are being affected for various reasons: teacher absenteeism, quality of teachers, overcrowding, and a lot of gaps in the pedagogy. So that means that government has to be very honest and still support the private sector, because if all investment is going directly to the public sector, that is the public schools, and yet when you look at the performance, you can still see that the private schools are giving a big contribution to the outcome. Government needs to rethink its strategies on that. And that means that we have to evaluate, instead of saying that we should spend more in USE or UPE or all these other programs, the question is, for the money that we've spent, what has actually been done? When you look at structures in the schools, let's say the infrastructure, we do not say exactly that UPE schools are built better despite the budget allocation. When you look at the teachers, the commitment to learning, the learning outcomes, the resources, there is still a gap from the budgeting point of view to actually what is implemented. It would even be possible that in arrangements where government has partnered with private entities under PPP, the investment has been clearer and matrices have been easy to measure. So the lessons that we can learn from this point is that there is a big budget to these government programs to support education, but the mechanism of accountability and ensuring that we actually get value for money have been lacking. And now with what's happening at this point, obviously, you know that private schools are affected more because, as Philbert has said, incomes have been lost. But if we continue to pay USC teachers, if we continue to pay UPE teachers, what is the best in terms of the taxpayer? The taxpayer is spending this money and people are getting salaries, but children are not studying. Why not instead set up a fund and maybe through UNATU or through the circles of the teachers and say, okay, we are taking care of all teachers, because it's not only government teachers that contribute to education, it's not only private teachers. And then say, okay, let's first give at least salaries for teachers or have salaries for the next 6 months. There have been some strange directives where the ministry just comes up and says you should pay teachers. But if you're telling private entities to pay teachers without
Mr.
education,
Godwin, we seem to have lost you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Harold?
Hello, Godwin, please continue. We can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So I was saying that some of the directives that have been given have been strange. And it just goes to show that there's an inconsistent messaging between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education, and being out of touch with actually what is happening. Because, for example, if the Ministry of Health directs that private schools should pay teachers, yet from what Philbert is telling us, a lot of these private schools have lost income, they have lost school fees, they have nothing to use. Why is government not thinking of these teachers either as a buffer short term or long term to say maybe let's have a fund instead of spending more money buying radios and TV, let's first make sure that these teachers are taken care of. And like he has said that the salaries of teachers are not increased. It's possible, even if they are being paid half. So let's direct this money through UNATU or through the teacher circles or district level and make sure this for the next few months. Private school payroll for registered teachers is given to government. So those are some of the lessons we can learn from this, that government support is neglecting private institutions, yet they are very vital actors and contributors to the education sector.
So let me just engage you on that point. In your analysis of the previous question you just answered, and in comparison with what is taking place in the other parts of the world, how in general would you rank the Uganda's education system in the region and the world at large, given the various international policies as reflected in what other countries are doing in general, government policies in managing private schools, in what they inject in the government schools? How would you rank the Ugandan education system?
I think that's a two-pronged question. So it could be technical and say that the Ugandan education system has a robust framework. There are so many laws, so many guidelines, some of which are even a cog in the system. And there's also an issue with, management of education at the Ministry of Education level, but yet at the local government level, that reports to the Ministry of Local Government. So in terms of frameworks and policies and laws, there are so many, and we would say that if those were implemented, we should expect more. But in my experience, to measure the education sector and its performance, we have to look at learning outcomes. And for the past so many years, the learning outcomes that have the reports that have been done and studies on Uganda is that we are one of the worst performing. Despite the interventions, despite UPA, despite USA, despite all the things we've been talking about, changing leadership at the very top, Uganda's performance at basic education level, and this is just maths and English, just basic physics level, studying. It has shown that our performance is very low, the worst in the region. So it begs the question: do we want to pass more laws, to have more stringent management, or actually evaluate if education is providing the pipeline? For example, when you look at the policy of automatic promotion, to come and pass a policy and say, despite whether the child has passed or not, they should be promoted to the next class. What human resource pipeline are you building? Because then you're not basing on the skills that you need for the marketplace, you're just basing on an academic care going by. How are you going to compete with other countries who actually evaluate students on the basis of skills that they get? So those are some of the challenges we have. We're not actually looking at the output, the learning outcomes in the education system, but we are focusing on directives, management, and some of those things are going to be
Very insightful. And as a policy analyst and being blessed with the experience that you have in the area, I want you to enlighten us on what people call the academic systems. We see in Uganda that what dominates is kindergarten, primary, and then high school, and then university. But we've seen other nations invest in the academic system of education based on specific talents and vocations, where our child is groomed from ground zero to be something that they see that they can perform better in. So is it time as a nation we ventured into the same as to nurture talent and vocations compared to that orthodox primary, high school, university kind of education?
I'd say yes or no, in the sense that in an ideal world, you want to have children at the earliest level focus on what they eventually use in the marketplace. But we also have to be sensitive to the culture that we have. Well, we have maybe first or second generation students in school now where their parents are not educated. So we have an illiteracy level that is higher than some countries that are focused on skills. And you can see that the challenge with copy-pasting systems, that you're not culturally sensitive, because when you look at the example of Chira Motors EV, you see, you just get students who have just done 4 years of electrical engineering and tell them they're going to do an electric car. So government gets a lot of money and puts it behind such a project. But a person who goes and studies what's happening at Tesla, despite the millions of dollars sunk in it, despite all these things, is technology that is still very hard to develop, it's still very hard to license, where you find that electric cars are something of the future, or something that requires a little more of research and development as opposed to implementation. The question is that the kind of project that government should get $900 million and put in instead of strengthening the tertiary system? So I would say that the biases have not been justified. Government will come and politicize the education system because maybe people who study political science or law, math, com are perceived to be agitators in society. And so you put a lot of money into what you call the sciences, but you do not have the job market to accommodate these people. So we have a lot of frustrated science graduates because there's no market for them. And yet, there are some skills that you know that regardless of where you're a scientist, you need to have communication skills, you need to have financial skills, you need to have basic skills to make you survive around. So we can introduce academy level training as a skill set. You know, in schools, add a bit of maybe accounting, a bit of basic sciences, basic arithmetic, regardless of what's happening. But to overhaul the whole system and say we are doing academic training, when you're not sure that there is a sufficient manufacturing industry or production industry to accommodate such skill set, it's full harder for the country to adapt to this problem.
Oh, very interesting. And before you go away, I have a last one for you. Let's talk about technology as a major player in education. And in light of COVID-19 and what really took place in Uganda, we saw some of the elite institutions try to play in with technology. We have examples of Law Development Center, for example, that you know about, and even some what people describe as first-class schools tried this technology thing, but still we had the parliament persistently against the move, as what Dr. Ebuk was saying, that if we are moving, let's move together. So do you think that we as a country have failed to embrace the use of technology in our education system in general?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give you context, I worked with an education institution for about 4 years, trying to introduce education at primary school level. And I've also lectured at TC. So we introduced this e-learning given before COVID. For the 4 years that I was there, we do some e-learning platforms and issue some assignments and some assessments online. But what was most outstanding when the COVID issue came up was a whole Minister of Education coming live on TV and demonstrating that she did not know what e-learning was about. And that tells you what the whole sector, the problem with the whole sector, because you have the whole university that has been piloting e-learning for maybe 5 years. These are professors, you have IT systems, you have licensed software, you have licensed research platform, and then the person who is your regulator does not understand the basics of what you're trying to do. So when such a technology becomes handy in a time when physical interaction is not possible, as a university you'd be expecting primary support from the regulator. But rather than take the time to first understand what's happening, our directive was no e-learning. And also it goes to show that it's not an issue really with the ability of the people, the universities, the schools to embrace technology, but the oversight framework is very wanting. Because, for example, when you say that let's just buy television and radios, the person giving such a directive has failed to buy masks, has failed to buy food. Education, radios and TVs, even if it was just for news or listening to talk radio, are very expensive, more expensive than all these other things that they have failed to do. But also when you look at the people in the villages, they will need batteries, they will need electricity, they will need to know when to tune in for this or the other. And again, you say, okay, if the issue is that you do not want people to be together, if you send one radio per village, what's going to stop people from being on one radio station or one radio piece listening? It just doesn't make sense because that throws away your social distancing measure, and then you wonder, was that even practical in the first place? So governments have refused to embrace steady developments in technology, because what technology helps, especially like at a basic level, even if schools are going on, is simple things like tracking absenteeism, harmonizing pedagogy, making sure there are no knowledge gaps, but it cannot replace the physical interaction that a teacher does. It cannot replace supervision. A lot of the interventions that have been given have fallen through the cracks because you find that parents are required to be home to supervise the children. Yes, they're paying school fees, the materials are coming on through, the internet, and you're saying, as a parent, should I stay home and become another teacher without the training, or I should go and work and So I think that we could have embraced the step-by-step development in education, at least maybe at the university level where the e-learning is possible, and say, okay, how do we need to support UCU or Macquarie, and say, maybe let's give them a fund to offer a few computers or LDs to subsidize the cost of the students. And maybe let's do separate semesters to have this rolled out. And with such interventions, the evaluation is not to say, okay, what more can we do? How can we scale? Because with that, even the universities will be able to continue teaching and get income to cater for some of the other issues that are happening, like teachers being laid off and institutions closing. So, yeah, we still have a big problem in understanding what role technology plays in the education sector. And in terms when we actually need that sort of intervention, we are just copy-pasting things that we ask them to work.
Just as a follow-up question, in light of what you've just discussed, and we've seen to your own conclusion, academies are hard, and then we cannot perfectly explore technology as an option. And then we have had the president say many times that we may have to wait until we get a vaccine to reopen the schools. And then the practical bit, as you've been discussing, is that use of technology is hard. So we are in that limbo as a nation. So the practicability, even after the vaccine comes in, what is your take on the bearing, on that whole thing of let's wait for the vaccine, bearing in mind, for example, the Immunization Act of 2017, which would come in handy to operationalize the directive, bearing in mind that we are not sure when the vaccine is coming. Maybe you can just throw a word or two on that aspect in 2 minutes, and then we shall get to the next panelist.
Yes, I think on that I'm totally with Dr. Obuku. We can totally open school as is, regardless of all this trouble going on, because we've seen it happen in Tanzania, we've seen it happen in Italy, we've seen it happen in countries that have been worse affected. So the issue is not vaccine or no vaccine. Besides, I think that at some point people will even challenge this vaccination issue, because the mandatory vaccination narrative has constitutional issues, has legality issues, and so you cannot
exactly
the whole economy on something like that. Besides, I think some of that demonstrates that the president sometimes either ill-advised is not aware of what he's talking about, because countries that have been doing research in things like this for longer than us are not anywhere close to coming up with a vaccine. What makes him think that Uganda has better chances of developing a vaccine? Well, we've never developed anything to eradicate malaria, we've never done anything to eradicate HIV, but something as novel as this COVID that is still mutating and still being analyzed, somehow we think that Uganda is going to advance better than everyone else. So there's a big challenge on that. Besides, there's also a cost implication. If a vaccine for something like that comes up, at this point, what's happening? Unless we are going to settle for substandard options, which has been seen, for example, in testing kits, we have been, we've seen faulty test kits being dumped into Africa. We can have even side effects of some of those things, and we are getting things we cannot afford. We are getting second-hand things which have a worse impact. I think that we should be benchmarking on countries that have resumed life normally without relying on the vaccine, relying on waiting for things that nobody can guarantee and nobody can trust that will solve the problem.
Thank you very much, Goodwin, for the very insightful information that you've given us. We've discussed a series of things, and I am sure that he has shed light where there was a little bit of darkness and shadows. And I will call upon my co-host, Joyce, to engage the next panelist. Joyce, are you on?
Yes, I am, Harold. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Um,
please. Thank you.
I had prepared myself for Godwin, but it looks like you took over. So I will hold the questions for the rebuttal, a little later. Now,
You shall get him
now,
on the question and answer session.
so now I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Clara Wekesa, who is an expert physician. I hope her CV can be put up for all of us to see. Dr. Clara is a trained physician with experience of over 8 years in practice. She is also a research fellow attached to the College of Health and Sciences, Makerere University, and is currently pursuing a research career in non-communicable diseases. She's also a wife and a mother. You are very welcome, Dr. Clara, to this platform. Could you say hello to our listeners?
Thank you, Joyce. Good afternoon to all our listeners.
Okay, good afternoon, Clara. Now, I wanted to start with a question to put you on the spot, but I think let me reserve it for question number 2. Now, you're here on this panel in basically 2 capacities, of course, as an expert physician who's a research fellow, and also as a parent like all of us. Now, talking about, and the topic today is our education system. How effective is it? Is this the right opportunity for us to now start thinking of change in light of everything that is happening? So talking about our education culture, especially in the city where for many of us who are parents, you have little children waking up as early as 4 a.m. to beat the jam and make it to school. Does this, in your opinion, have any effect on the growth of a child and the development? Do you think that we can use this opportunity where schools have been shut down to review our system, with government making all these
Hello? Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yes, were you able to get the question?
I stopped at the part where you're saying if we could utilize this or optimize this time to review our educational system.
Yes, because prior to this, what has been happening is, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate, is you have a child, you have a 5-year-old, you have a 6-year-old having to wake up at 4 a.m. in order to beat the jam and get to school in time. So I'm wondering, you're a parent for one, but more importantly, you're a physician and a researcher. Do you think that kind of lifestyle for a child affects their growth and development? I'll give you an illustration. I have a friend who's a doctor as well, and you can, correct me if I'm wrong, if I got the wrong interpretation, but what he told me is that the time that the child develops and grows is actually between the hours of 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. Now, the current system that we've had is the child has to be up at 4 in order to beat the jam and get to school at 7. Do you think this is healthy for our children? And if it isn't this the right time for us to start rethinking about this system? And especially in regard to the health of our children.
Okay, thank you, Joyce, for that question. I don't know if I will tackle that question as it is, but in my opinion, yes, it does impact child development. I mean, I'm specifically talking about what we are trying to adopt, and in my opinion, I hope it's not long term when we're thinking about e-learning and IT-based means of learning, like my colleague, Dr. Obuku, mentioned that e-learning is effective. Yes, I think it is effective for adults in particular, because children of a certain age have particular attention span. It would have been good to have the opinion of a pediatrician, child specialist, but I particularly think that long-term effects of having your children sit in front of a computer, a screen the whole day, like you have been seeing during this call, we've been having difficulties and challenges. Just imagine a child's schedule, a P7 child's schedule for the whole, online learning is probably going to take the whole day, seated at a computer and not doing anything else. Us as adults have suffered repercussions of doing that on a daily for a few hours of the day at work, having migraines, having posture problems, backache, and all, and the sort of that. The question I would have is that what we want to expose our children to at a very early age? Is there no way of the different sectors working together to ensure that we can still go back to our mode of education? Probably children don't have to wake up that early, do something about the transportation and the chaos in town, so that you can have children go to school quite early, or better still, have schools within your living environment that are just as good as the school you'd have wanted to take your child to. So for me, the e-learning, I have reservations, especially for children, for those reasons. And also being in the field of non-communicable diseases, where we're talking about sedentary lifestyle, is exactly what we're exposing our children to at a very early age. And it is, I think we have seen, even as parents, that childhood obesity is quite common these days. And by doing this, we're just facilitating all of this. For us to wait for problems in future, our children are going to develop diabetes early, they're going to develop hypertension early. So there's a lot of thought process that has to be put into these decisions. Even in terms of mental health, I think you have seen this. Kenya has been reporting that a lot of the adolescent girls are getting pregnant during this time. We have those statistics as well in Uganda. So different sectors need to come together and think about how safely we can open schools, as has been discussed. That's my opinion. And as Dr. Obuku also alluded to, a school environment provides for other advantages just by association. Children associating with their peers helps them to pick up certain concepts and life skills, how to share, how to resolve conflict, how to build even leadership. Leadership is built at a very early age. Yeah, so we deny them all of these. I'm just wondering about parents who, for example, have their children or have one child and live in a bungalow. And all this time during the lockdown, the child has been secluded. That definitely must have some kind of impact on their functionality. Whether we don't see it immediately, we just might experience it in the long term. So what kind of individuals are we developing for society later on? So those are my concerns as a parent. And as he said correctly, most of us are working. You cannot exactly dedicate a lot of time to supervising your children. Not all of them are in the same class. Do you as a parent possess all those teaching skills for all those varied subjects for all your children? You're basically giving up your career for this. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doctor. We seem to have lost Joyce because of network, but as she comes back on behalf of our listeners and everyone who's listening to what you've just talked about, in terms of the path choice of a child, let's just talk about the career. We have had our traditional setting as Ugandans and even as Africans to dictate what my child will do, what he will study. I am a lawyer, I want him to be a lawyer. In our family, we have engineers, I want him to be an engineer. How much should a parent influence the career path of their children at that? And where should they come in? Should they dictate what is the perfect way of a parent handling that?
I personally came from a family. My father was a lawyer, and I do have lawyers in the family, but we were never influenced. I think for me, it would be best to, especially at an early age, try to understand the strengths and the interests of your children, and then try to develop them along that line. I'm a doctor, but I, like Dr. Obuku, went into policy. I'm into research. We have different experiences. I know there's that traditional thinking of the traditional professions, lawyers, doctors, engineers, but there are other career opportunities or ventures that are cropping up that are very relevant for the time. For example, I would assume during this COVID time, the people who have had a blast, for lack of better words to say, would be the IT best people, because everything is turning IT best. So I would advise parents to read into the times and then guide their children along that, along what they see. We shouldn't have traditional thinking. I think the world is changing. A lot is changing about the world. In future, we may not need bank tellers as it is. There's online banking. You may not need this. There's online this. So parents should really be open-minded and just try to guide children as much as possible in their career ventures, and something that leads to solid establishment in future. Yeah, because even as doctors, Dr. Obuko might comment, we are having artificial intelligence come into the field. Artificial intelligence to the extent of doing even heart surgery, open heart surgery. So machines look like they're quickly replacing human beings. So parents need to put all these into consideration.
Thank you. But let me just have a follow-up on that. The direct question was in terms of some parents who dictate of, I want my child to do this. And then those who defend it say that these children are excited about these things and may be blinded by their youthfulness. So I just wanted you to tackle the point of where the parent should stop in terms of directing their child.
As a parent, I don't think you ever stop directing your child. Children are children, even when they are married, they're still your children. You can only give guidance. When they're young, it's easy to dictate and tell your child, do this and do that. But when they reach a certain age, you can't really dictate. I know personally a colleague who took a full course of medicine, 5 years, simply because they were instructed by their father. And after their course, they handed over the certificate to the father and went and did accountancy. So sometimes those kind of decisions are counterproductive. A child has lost 5 years of their lives. They would have done something else.
Yes, doctor.
Hello?
Hello, doctor, can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Yeah, and so parents, I don't know, there's no one rule about parenting, but parents need to nurture and develop their relationship with their child to make that environment conducive for a child to express themselves appropriately to their parents, and for an exchange of ideas, yeah, and conversation. Because for sure you cannot completely dictate over a child when they get to, say, university. They are deemed an adult at that point of time. They can make their own decisions, even by law. Yeah.
Let me enlarge your spectrum of discussion to something related to that, but a little bit different in terms of university and higher education. With more than 51 certified universities in Uganda, and in light of the poor performance of most of them, actually, we have had very few universities making it to the higher rankings or the average rankings. With most of them, out of 51, most of them have had very, very poor continental and global rankings. Do you think the Ministry of Education and Sports and the National Council of Higher Education is doing enough to vet and supervise in terms of fostering their growth? And what proposals would you put in forward for the ministry and the National Council of Higher Education to make sure that we have better statistics in that area?
What you say is true. There are a lot of universities. I can relate to my field in medicine. Not so long ago, it was only Makerere and Mbarara that were graduating doctors and pushing them out in the field. And then now we have several other universities. There's been varied experiences with people from these other universities. I think the people in those institutions are doing the best they can. I think government can also give support in terms of quality control and ensuring that certain necessities are in place. I think one too many times, and Dr. Obuko can illustrate, you've seen interns rioting or striking because of lack of this and lack of that. Internship is a learning process for the young doctor, and the learning process is enhanced by having the things that you need in order to learn. But unfortunately, sometimes you are in a situation where you are learning by what he said, simulation, and these are practical courses. You need to be hands-on. So I can only talk about my profession. So government needs to ensure quality control. It needs to ensure adequate supervision so that who we are churning out, they are well qualified. They're well qualified. After all, they are going to handle the lives of other people out there. You wouldn't want to send out reckless doctors or send out half-baked products. So it is worth investing. I imagine it to be any kind of M&E system. It does not stop. Simply because you sanctioned it from the beginning does not mean you keep on, you don't keep on evaluating and seeing your progress and seeing how to improve in certain aspects and what can be, brought in place. So it's a continuous process, and it involves many stakeholders. And yeah, I would imagine also the duty of the governing bodies to bring all the stakeholders in one place with one mind and one vision on what needs to be achieved instead of working in isolation. So sometimes you have very disjointed visions in terms of what government is saying and what the technical people are saying. So there needs to be some kind of harmony created there as well. Yeah, so a lot more can be done.
Thank you very
much. Good to have many universities, but let's ensure the quality and the standard that is coming out.
I think we vote for quality and quantity if it's available, but if we have to choose, we better choose quality in the circumstances.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah, when you were discussing, we had a very interesting comment from Philbert, who is saying on the issue that you were discussing about the career guidance and dictation of choice of career. And he says that parents should study the interests of their children and get role models in the field to help their children admire the lives they live. If you force your child on what to learn, they study, but it remains yours, and they will study theirs at an opportune time, which is the example you gave of your friend who was forced to do something and yet they wanted to do accountancy. So I think it's very important for all the parents that are listening in right now to know where to stop and as far as career guidance is concerned. And my last question to you, and which will go to all the panelists in the question and answer session, Dr. Clara, what would you recommend as the most pressing change needed in our education system in general? Where you see and you're like, this is a major problem that needs to be sorted. What do you recommend?
Apart from letting our children start school again? Apart from that, I would I would personally think relevant education. What is the content of the curriculum? I have never stopped saying I learned Canadian prairies, and I have never applied it in my living ever. I don't even know if they still exist. So what is the content of the education that we are giving our children, and is it effective when they grow up? Can they apply it? Or are we just simply passing time, and yet we could be developing certain skills they have quite early on? Yeah, we find that we are.
What would be your input in as far as improving our curriculum is concerned? Because we have had a recent change, but what do you want to see included in our curriculum and co-curricular activities that would better the status quo?
I think you spoke about it. I think the previous speaker might have thought it was in replacement of what we have, but as an add-on, those kind of practical skills, yeah, could be an add-on. We see that a lot of graduates are still very unemployed, and yet they don't have a technical skill as such. Yeah, it could be something that they can leverage on. Or have, but I think that needs to be thought about. We don't seem to have any more polytechnic institutions anymore, and not everybody who finishes Form 6 is making it to university. And in this discussion, we might be blinded to think about only the Kampala children, but the greater majority of the children are outside of Kampala.
Very, very, very interesting. You conclude our first session, which was inclusion of and discussion from all panelists. I can see Mr. Philbert Baguma very active in the chat room, and he has just dropped another one where he's saying that it's very sorry that we still follow the curriculum that was left by the colonialists, even we at this stage, which is in conjunction with what we've been discussing. I can see Joyce is very back, and you're just coming in at the point where our doctor had just concluded in what she thinks is the most pressing need. And she says that apart from reopening the schools right now, we need to do a little bit something on the curriculum. Those who are just tuning in would like to tell you that we were supposed to have Honorable Sewungu, but he's bedridden and he's in hospital, and we can continue to say a prayer for his quick recovery and perfection. But some of the questions that were directed to Honorable Sewungu, and even the questions that we've gotten from our listeners and those watching us on Facebook, will be summed together, and Joyce shall kick us on. Joyce, you are lucky that we have Mr. Baguma back, so you can kick him in on the point of our curriculum. We have seen a recent change, and we don't know whether it is working for the better or for worse. So you can start him off with that for our question and answer session. You're welcome back, Joyce.
Thank you, Harold. I hope everyone can hear me. I think today is a classic example of maybe the e-learning system might not necessarily work for everyone, because clearly we are in Kampala and we are having all these network challenges. So what about the children up country, you know, in all these other places in the country? Does this really work? There are a number of questions that are in the chat room, but I wanted to start off with one with Clara. And this is in regard to what she's been talking about. I just got the gist of the last portion of it. And it's in regard to the curriculum and deciding parents' influence and all that, and children being able to choose what they would want to do at a very early on stage. Now, I'm going to give you two examples. I'm looking at a child who has been forced to go through the education system, and each time has been characterized as a child who is a failure and all that, and yet by the time they're done with the system, they're finally able to discover their talents, or which they knew they had but were not free to communicate, and discover that actually they were set out to be musicians. Now, I wanted to know your take on that. Being now the other, a parent who has decided, yes, from my young child, I can see that my child has interest in music. And so from here on, just go on
Joyce,
in music school,
yeah.
and then they get no clue about, and is there like a middle ground for us?
I think you need to repeat the second question. I kind of lost you there.
My question was, I was giving you an illustration of two extremes whereby you have a child who has been brought up in a family where the parents feel that, you know what, they need to go through this curriculum in order to have a secure future, only for them to discover after years in university that, you know, of constantly being told they're failures in school, only to discover that actually they were meant to be musicians. And they finally embark on their chosen career, but this is at the age of 30, 40, so several years are lost. Vis-a-vis a parent who sees, say, the gifting of their child at age 6 or 7, and then chooses to pursue the music career from that age on, but then they become very proficient in that gifting, but they lose out on these basic skills of math, of English, and all that. So I'm giving you two extremes, and I'm wondering, what is your take on that? Do we have like a middle ground that you could propose for our education system?
Joyce, that is a very unfair question, but I have had this question before. And my take on this question would be, it would still be important to put your child through that kind of learning for essential subjects, say mathematics and English, yeah, as you build on, say, their interest. Because if you're looking at something like a music career, just think about it. Besides people like Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston, who has had a very long music career, they always evolve to something else, even if it is sports figures or sports personality. They go into clothing line. Michael Jordan is not playing basketball anymore. So what is, as a parent, what is your plan for the after career? After you cannot sing anymore, after you're not the star anymore, what happens? So my suggestion would be to, from the beginning, to a certain extent, you can build both, because children at that age can learn so many skills at the same time. You can build both. At the stage where the child is making their ultimate decision and you probably don't have much of an influence, well, you could have equipped them with two skills that they can have a fallback plan, depending on what career choice it was. So putting, I think that would have to be put into consideration. I don't see a music career as a long term. They're not going to sing until they're 70. So they'll have to refashion themselves, to rebrand themselves. And how do they do that? They'll have to acquire other skills as well, whether it is marketing, it is a business strategy, training, they'll need those.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Clara. I will try not to put you on the spot again. I'm still looking at now what's in the chat room, and Mr. Philbert has been very active on this forum. And one of the comments that he makes is, when reforms are made, we don't need to change much. Our learners are given too much, which does not fit into what they finally study for in their work. So, according to this comment, Mr. Philbert, who is the Secretary General of Uganda National Teachers Union, our students are being given too much information, and a lot of it they don't seem to use after. So now this question is to you, Mr. Philbert. Is it high time that now parents started embracing maybe other curricula, maybe looking into things like homeschooling, as, you know, as a solution to the disadvantages that we would find in our orthodox system, or maybe as a rebuttal to the impact of COVID and the fact that now schools are closed? What is your take on that?
Thank you very much. We don't need to burden the parents so much. Yes, we can have homeschooling, but it may not be as successful as one may seem to take. But what we need as Ugandans, as stakeholders, we need to continue with this discussion. What is it that we are giving the learners, and what does it contribute to their lifetime, because the SDGs now provide for lifelong learning. What is it that we are looking at? Because what the child learns in the lower classes, as you continue to study, you will realize, including teachers, by the way, that what they are studying, let's say at grade 5, that is diploma level, and at university, you find they are completely different from what they go to teach in the classroom. Therefore, the disconnect in the content of what is taught in school with what takes place in the work environment must be addressed. Unless we address that, then we shall continue to look at children and we call them failures. They are not failures. It is simply that we have failed to identify their strong areas. Because not all of us can be a one size fits all. There are those who are very good and talented in music. But in the primary where they are studying, there is no examination for music. And then you say the person is a failure. But when they get out of school, you find them, they are successful people. You might find someone is talented in football. There is no examination for football. But you will realize that the school system will now rank this learner as a non-performer, as a failure. They will even give him or her so many nines. But this person can make life in another field. Therefore, we need to have a system that identifies the talents of the learners at an early stage, so that the education we give them is tailored to the skill, to the talent the child has. And that will help us to move. Even when you look at our graduates from these tertiary institutions, from universities, some of them are said to be weak, but they may not necessarily be weak, but what they studied is not what they are talented in. But because there is no option, they go for what is there. And therefore, that is the discussion that Ugandans should engage in, so that the curriculum we have is a curriculum for Ugandans, not a curriculum for those who bring money and say, we want you to reform the curriculum, and then they show the direction we should take. And to me, that is the most important thing that we should look at now.
Okay, thank you so much for that comment. There's actually Pauline Odongo in the chat room who says, Mr. Philbert, thank you so much for bringing us on board. National Curriculum Development Center should be very inclusive and consultative when designing the curriculum. And I think that is what you're trying to say. And I think you're rightly placed as Secretary General to really air the views of you, the teachers, and seeing the impact of what you're teaching and how it's actually affecting our students. Which leads me to another question, which is part of what we've been asking a lot of the other panelists, and what's really the elephant in the room. And I want to hear your opinion on this. With more than 7 million Ugandans being school-going citizens, you're the Secretary General of the National Teachers Union. What would you propose? What is your stand towards the reopening of these schools? Because we have heard from a lawyer, we've heard from doctors. Now you who's you're representing the teachers. What is your stand? What would you propose?
First of all, the challenge with our Ugandan schools is that they don't conform to the current SOPs. When you look at the school setup, if you go to most of the schools, you will find we have enrollment. In some cases, over 100 learners. Over 100 learners in one classroom. Now, when you look at the guidelines from World Health Organization and from Ministry of Health, they are insisting on social distancing. They are insisting on hand washing. They are insisting on sanitizing. They are insisting we must have temperature guns. Now, when you look at the SOPs, it brings a very, very challenging situation to the school setup. And we don't want to be on record that we demanded that the schools reopen and then the positive cases increase and tomorrow they say you are the ones who said you want to be there. We want to be guided by the scientists, like I heard the doctor saying, because they are the ones dealing with the situation. The first death in Uganda was a medical worker. We need to know to what extent is the danger of COVID-19, so that when we open, we already know that our schools are congested. So if they are congested, what is going to happen with the social distancing? Obviously, if you apply social distancing, very many schools cannot open. We have secondary schools which have got about over 5,000 learners. So when you apply social distancing, how many schools will you have in one school? If you look at a class of 60, if you apply social distancing, it would mean you need about 3 other classrooms, and those will be 4. The 4 classrooms will translate into infrastructure. The 4 classrooms will translate into more teachers. So as teachers, we are in a dilemma. We are very ready. We are psychologically tortured because we are supposed to be teaching and we are not teaching. We are concerned about the learners. The learners are really suffering. This has brought an idea to know that the school is the best place for the learners because they are at home and things have gone berserk. You have had those who have been impregnated, others have been married off, others have gone for petty jobs. We are right now talking about 7 million, but by the time we reopen, the numbers will have dwindled. And therefore, the scenario we are in is a very, very funny scenario, but for us as teachers, we are more than ready, but the challenge is the government needs to rethink. First of all, this time of lockdown should have been used to prepare for the reopening. But I don't see much being done because even government should have come up with a supplementary budget to support the schools because very few schools can implement the standard operating procedures. If you say the hand washing facility should be the one which is foot operated, how many of those can you find in our upcountry districts? If you need soap to wash hands, how many schools will buy soap on a daily basis? If you talk of temperature guns, it means if you have an enrollment of 1,000 learners in one compound entering the gate, you will need to have about 5 temperature guns so that you don't waste time in the lining to measure the temperature. 2, these temperature guns also need to be regulated. Otherwise, people will buy one. I have been to some places in Kampala where you go, you find the security person has a temperature gun. They put it on you, it does not read. They try the second time, the third time, and they say, you go. So we don't want such a scenario in a school setup. And therefore, government needs to do a lot more than what it is doing now. Instead of buying radios and putting in place radio lessons and TV lessons, this money would have been used to prepare the education institutions so that the schools reopen. Otherwise, currently, there is no learning that is taking place. There is no way children can learn on radio, P1, P2, P3, P4, and you say they are listening to the radio learning. No way. It doesn't work. We can have e-learning when we have e-learning infrastructure in place. There is no infrastructure in place, and therefore a lot of money is being spent, but little is being achieved in terms of access to learning, especially in the rural setup. And therefore we need to look at all these issues. But for us, if the scientists today said the curve has flattened, or if they came up and said it is now safe, for us as teachers, we are more than ready to go back and teach. Hello.
Mr. Baguma, can you hear us?
I can hear you now.
Yes, yes. So thank you very much. That's very, very insightful. We can go on and on, but because of time, we'll have to cut you short on that as we wait for your turn to answer one or two questions at the end. I don't know whether we have Masiko Godwin online. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Mr. Matiko. Yes, there's a question here for you from one of the people that are tuning in. And it's on legislation. So in light of the fact that there are very few passed acts by Parliament and even very few pending bills relating to education, do you think the Parliament has done enough to help steer the nation's education in the right direction? In a minute or two.
Yes, I think in terms of the laws, we have enough laws for the sector. The question though should be,
okay,
does Parliament have relevant oversight on the current leadership of Ministry of Education? The answer is no. The few times we've had Parliament serve on the Ministry of Education, not much has been achieved. I think that goes back to the question of whether the frameworks we have in place are sufficient for Parliament to check different institutions when they actually need answers. At the moment, I don't think Parliament is in a position to intervene in the education sector.
And just related to that, what is your opinion on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, like goal number 4 pertaining to the quality education? How are we doing in general? In a minute or two for that one too.
We are still falling short because, like some of the other panelists have said, on how education is continuous and different metrics that we should be looking at. It's not just a matter of running schools, it's not just a matter of schools opening, it's not just a matter of laws. It's a question of learning outcomes and having a pipeline of human resources that's workable, that skills are measured. And so we are falling short on most of those parameters. Issues that we come up with in such times, such as radios and TVs, instead of long-term sustainable situations like strengthening the technical institutes and putting up some more skilled courses in schools, shows that it's not just that we are falling short, but our commitment to seeing some of these SDGs through is still wanting.
Philbert, switching to you now. Philbert, can you hear me?
Yes, please. I can hear you.
We have had a recent shift in the syllabus coverage for some of the subjects in high school, and a whole total shift with some new subjects included, topics deleted, and even some other subjects answered. Was the move necessary? And if it was, how effective will it be to make us as a nation produce better students from the high school level?
The move was
in a minute or two.
The move was necessary, but the problem was it was brought when we were ill prepared. And therefore, because of ill preparedness, we may not achieve much. You remember when they started implementing it, there were no instructional materials. Even right as I talk now, the schools were just being told you go to online and download the books, and these books were not even the textbooks, they were prototypes. And therefore, we are still doing most of our things as if they are emergencies. So, whereas it is a good move, we may not do much because the senior ones are not actually learning. Even the teachers were not prepared enough to handle the new content and methodology.
Thank you very much. Do we have Dr. Clara on? Doctor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, there's a question here for you from, I think this is a parent that is asking that apart from the non-primary role of shelter and payment of school fees that has been taken on as a traditional role of a parent in upbringing of children, what more can be done by the Ugandan parent to be part of the children's educational life apart from those roles that they have known to be theirs? In 60 seconds, please.
Yes, I think Mr. Philbert already hinted on that when he asked that parents should identify mentors for their children, because as a parent, you may not be multi-skilled or multi-talented, but your child might be going in another direction other than what you are versed with. So it would be a good practice. And I think it's something lacking in our African culture, the culture of mentorship. So develop that, link them to the right people so that it is a lifelong learning process.
Wow, amazing. I think we lost Dr. Ebuku. I saw a signal that we had lost him. I had one for him. But for the purposes of time, I would like to encourage the listeners and whoever has been tuning in to continue the discussion on the social media platforms that we've been using. For Twitter, you can go to Coronel Co, and for Facebook, that's the same name, Coronel Co. Continue the discussion, engage the panelists and everyone who has been listening to make sure that the mission of this webinar is just not a chat room complaining audience, but we see how to steer our education as a nation to the right direction. For all the panelists, from Dr. Clara to Mr. Godwin Muhwezi, Mr. Philbert Baguma, Dr. Ebuku, and Honorable Sewungu in absentia, we would like to thank you very much for participating and choosing to take part of in this discussion. And we are sure that the seeds we have shown to our nation shall be picked on by the sector players and those that make decisions in these different offices to make sure that we really set pace to the nation that we want to see in this major mountain of influence, which is education. And to the organizers and the sponsors, we thank you very much. We cannot stop to thank you enough. Coronel Co, thank you for organizing, Creambell and KYC. Thank you very much to our panelists and whoever has been tuning in. We thank you, and we are gratefully honored to be part of nation building as you've done today. But for now, we have to close it at that. And in case of any second bit of this engagement, we shall be willing to engage you in to continue this discussion at even on different platforms to make sure that our mission is served. But from me and the whole team, and even my co-host Joyce Katende, we thank you and God bless you. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.